what I perceive about King of Pops is a business that has soul to it. And I'm curious if soul scales with franchising.
Yeah.
And how do you keep the wear the shirt, get sweaty? Like, how do you keep the irreverent, maybe the right or not right word, but like playful energy that you all have and translate that into a franchise model?
I think it scales just as well with franchising as it does with any other scale. So like, you know, Starbucks or something, I don't know. I just think that's a matter of how many people and how well you do to tell your vision and your story. So I actually think that a franchisee is going to be more bought in than an employee that we hire in Charlotte that I've never met that XYZ. We actually did it that way before. We had both. And there, I would say, are a proportion of people that are bought in and care, and a proportion of people that it's a job and they kind of care. And there's a portion of people that are like actively kind of not caring.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality that I've seen every way that we've run the business. And instead of worrying about the people that don't care, leaning into the people that do care. I mean, it's just like the, I don't know, 80-20 rule or all those types of things where it's like, instead of worrying about your worst, focus on your best.
Yeah.
And
so
I think we've done that.
The soul actually does scale, going back to some of the very first things you said around you draw energy from it because you have ownership in it and you want it to succeed. And
I think it does definitely scale because the people that are bought in as franchisees feel just from, if I talk to them about whether we're going to approve or not approve a logo alteration, like they are in it. Like,
sure.
And it's not always the way you would imagine. And I think, I mean, soul is maybe a word that we throw around in a lot of different ways. And I think it's a good one for our brand. I think we're differentiated in that way. But similarly to kind of what I said about my brother, I don't think that I know how to inject soul into the business other than care about it a lot.
Yeah. To me, soul is kind of, if you mashed up, be thoughtful, get sweaty, and wear the shirt. It's like what you're going to produce is more than pressing a button at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Not to say Starbucks can't be soulful, but it's different when you're closer to the work.
Yeah. I think you're closer to it, but it is hard. I mean, it's definitely important to figure out how to manufacture the moments that are going to provide the opportunity for soul, but you can't just do it. Like, so going back to wear the shirt, like when we do orientations, I tell people the story. I say, I wear the shirt every day, I care a lot about it, but I don't expect you to. Like, you're here, it's your first day. Like, we haven't done anything to earn you caring about this yet. Like, if we do our job right in 3-6 months, hopefully you will have your own version of wear the shirt or soul or whatever word we want to use. But it's something that you have to kind of earn by being a brand that is focused on something, I believe, more than just money. So, some of the kind of like tangible ways we do that are create unexpected moments of happiness by giving away a lot of free pops and figuring out ways like, are you really into Magic the Gathering? You can go give out pops at Magic the Gathering Con with your friends, or you want to go to the Humane Society, or you want to go to a children's hospital or school or a baseball team or whatever. And once they do that and they're able to show up with the shirt on and do nothing other than like say like, hey, these are just for you, just to make your day happier. If they're able to do that, and we encourage people to do that, but we don't make them do it. The ones that do are the ones that love being here. And it's a formula, but you can't make someone want to go do that.
Yeah. It goes from a uniform to something that they want to put on voluntarily and are proud of. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Is there a world in which like that's just terrifying to people? And if they don't have levers that they can pull in diet, health, exercise, other lifestyle, all you're doing is giving them what feels like a death sentence. And if anything, it might have a negative impact on quality of life over that time period if they're going to get the cancer anyway. Yeah. Like, does that resonate? How do you work around fears like that?
Right.
Like,
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the anxiety issue is a very real one.
Yeah, but would you want to know if I could tell you today you're gonna have a malignant tumor in 10 years, would you want that information?
I think I personally I think I would. I think I would, and I think this kind of approach becomes very useful, particularly when you're having conversations around cessation for certain habits, right? Sure. So you take tobacco cessation. Having a conversation with somebody about giving up smoking, potentially might be more challenging than if you were to have that conversation with, hey, we've done this analysis and there is a 78% likelihood that you're going to develop, lung cancer in the next 3 years. I think yes, it is a little bit of fear mongering and it increases your anxiety, but potentially becomes a way of helping, change habits. And so I think that ultimately that information has to be provided in a way that is positive and that results in a pathway for change and positive change.
Sure.
Right. And certainly we don't want to sort of, come across like, hey, this is what the AI is saying, and there's a certain finality about it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's not the point. And it's also important to understand, of course, that, the AI is about probabilities. And
Sure.
It's important to understand because this is a concept that often gets conflated. Probability that something is going to happen with 80% does not mean it's going to happen, right? I mean, you see this every day with the weather reports.
Sure.
70% likelihood of rain. That means that there's a probability. There's a 70% probability it'll rain. It doesn't mean it is definitely going to rain.
Yeah.
Right? And that's important to understand as well.
Yeah. Strikes me that there's a big difference in how it would be received, at least for me, with the level of agency that I would have on being able to change it if I change lifestyle factors.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing if you said, here's your AI death sentence about your dementia that's coming in 10 years, you can't do anything about it,
right.
compared to, hey, you're on a glide path that might lead to heart disease,
right.
but here are 10 things that you can do regularly now to change your risk profile.
Exactly.
I mean, super delicate to get that messaging right.
Right. But that's where, we also recognize and understand. And that's why as the Institute, we are working with implementation scientists. We're working with neurologists. We're working with cardiologists who are able to suggest and propose some of those remedial factors, right? So if the particular trajectory you're on, the analysis suggests that you're going to develop Alzheimer's in 5 years or 10 years. Being able to provide along with that information, the kind of activities or kind of interventions that would allow you to pivot or change that trajectory and move into a different path so that you reduce the likelihood of that event, I think is very positive. Now, as the data scientists, the AI engineers, we don't have the wherewithal to be able to provide that kind of expertise. But that's exactly why partnering with the Emory Goizeta Brain Health Institute, the cardiovascular clinic, becomes so critical, right? And that's really what we want to do, is not just simply provide the AI information, but AI coupled with potentially what could be remedial or set you on sort of an alternative, more positive path.
Connecting some of the dots. I have a story that without the Atlanta Development Authority becoming Invest Atlanta, there's no Beltline, and how many people who are listening to this, enjoy the Beltline. And now it's easy to kind of see the Beltline as an unstoppable force. But I know that it was not always assured that each of the neighborhoods was going to sign up and say yes, that they were going to get the land and the approval and otherwise. Was there ever a time when that felt especially on the rocks? And how did you all navigate that, making sure that that transformational project could kind of stay on path and become what it has and is becoming?
So I can't take any credit for that because that all happened before I got here. So people like Ryan Gravel and Kathy Woolard and Brandon Sutton and all these amazing leaders did all that work, all that. Shirley Franklin. Now I'm getting myself in trouble because I'm naming names. There's a lot of people around this community that, did something very difficult. They sold a vision, which was not so easy to communicate, in that even when I came to Atlanta as the CEO of Invest Atlanta, and the Beltline is actually a subsidiary of Invest Atlanta, it took me a minute to understand what the Beltline was. Even after they took me out, and we hadn't poured any concrete yet. The East Side Trail was just getting started in 2011, right when I got here. So it was like the first real part of the Beltline. But prior to that, they were doing bus tours where they were holding up artist renderings. So they'd stop the bus on a bridge and they'd hold up an artist rendering and say, this kudzu covered corridor is going to look like this one day, you know? And it was a real grassroots effort that seems to me Herculean, how they were able to achieve it and create the tax allocation district, which is very, very difficult to do legally, and get it going. It was pretty remarkable. I showed up in 2011. It's kind of like being born on third base where the concrete was already being poured. So my job was just to keep it going, and I eventually became the CEO of the Beltline, and my job was to just accelerate it, get it going faster. That's kind of what I felt like, and try to honor and keep to the original vision as much as possible.
Yeah. And what about that Beltline experience ties in with Centennial Yards? And do you see things that are analogous there? And I promise we're going to get to what is Centennial.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So that's a good question. So when I was considering taking the job that I have now, president of Centennial Yards Company, I called John Hope Bryant, a good friend of mine, who I mentioned earlier. And I said, what do you think? And, he's like, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. And he's friends with Tony Ressler, and Tony Ressler is one of the investors in Centennial Yards. And actually John's an investor as well. So he was like, I think it would be great. And I said, yeah, it's like the Beltline. Like it's a $5 billion project. He said, I think it's bigger than the Beltline. And I was like, well, how's that? And he goes, because everybody that comes to Atlanta will go to Centennial Yards. Not everybody that comes to Atlanta is going to end up on the Atlanta Beltline. I know there's going to be people who are listening saying, boo, hiss, Brian's, that's not true. Everybody goes to the Beltline. I challenge that. I don't think everybody, you come here for a convention, I don't know if you have time to go to the Beltline, let's put it that way. But you're definitely going to end up in Centennial Yards. So Centennial Yards is sort of like our Times Square, right? It's going to be like our Times Square. It's going to be a place where people are going to want to go and be seen and, take their selfie to prove to everybody they were in Atlanta, behind some artwork that says Atlanta or something like that, something iconic to Atlanta. So I think the Beltline, both are transformational projects, right?
Do you think our kids, we have kids similar age,
Yeah.
are they going to have AI friends? Like, will their best friends be AI? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they will have AI friends. I think it's kind of inevitable. My big question is, will they have AI friends that are like one-on-one friendable versus like, someone else in your text thread that plays a certain part within your group? Does that make sense? Like, I think that, for example, and I'm sure I'll look back on this in 10 years and be like, wow, we totally missed the point of like,
The obvious thing that was just sitting there that we didn't know.
So this is probably a very narrow view, but similar to how I think about using AI in work, right now I think of it as a team member or an extension of the self. And I could totally see it starting to play a almost semi-conscious role. Meta has done a really good job adding into WhatsApp, like different personalities you can talk to that are like really pretty compelling, frankly. But like, would I just talk to that person versus would it be useful to have like, I have an AI analyst that sits in my fantasy football chat group, right? That like is a friend, quote unquote, and they'll probably develop a lot. So I don't know. It's hard to say. And my guess is that, the more important question that I think you'll probably get to if I know you is, does it matter, and how does that change their development and how they become happy and effective adults? And I think like the reason I would be afraid of allowing that in my household is the same reason I'm afraid of allowing social media in my household. Not because there's some evil, dark Mark Zuckerberg somewhere. I think he's a great guy, actually. But I think that the algorithms that they develop are incentivized by the open market to do stuff that is not actually good for my kids, right? It's pure incentives. There's no evil dictator behind all this stuff, which people think sometimes. It's just simple economics. And I would be worried letting my kids befriend an AI for the same reason, because whoever's developing that probably has incentives that are beyond just making my kid happy and healthy.
Yeah, if you're going to pay money for the AI to be friends with your daughter, and your daughter wanting it is predicated on how much time she wants to spend with it, then naturally, to some level, it wants to addict her.
100%.
And so therein lies the rub.
You nailed exactly. Exactly.
And I mean, the thing that, again, there's shades of gray and how this is going to play out. I mean, the thing that I can get excited about is like an empathetic sounding board that would help process things that are going on out in the world for her. But on the flip side, at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, what values was that encoded with? What's it trading on?
Yeah.
And so maybe, that becomes what somebody is marketing, or their go-to-market strategy is predicated on the values that are embedded in the friendship model.
Right. Which goes back to why I think it's really important for us to have our own personalized model. Well, I'm thinking about this live. I haven't actually considered this before, so good questions. I think there could be a really good argument that whether it's Apple or Village Labs from a business perspective, developing a model for Brent, like you, right, that perhaps that's your daughter's friend, where there's a way that you can give her access to asking something based off of your values as her parent.
Oh, wow.
That is private to you. So there's almost like a mode you can give to your family members that's like, talk to dad, Now there's ways that can go dark as well, right? Sure. But I think that that's one way maybe we could get around some of these concerns around incentives.
Yeah. Ancestor mode. That's interesting to consider.
Yeah, 300 years, maybe someone can still talk to us after our death.
Yeah. And again, like the optimistic side in me is, that old adage that you are the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
Like if one of those becomes an AI because you have a C-3PO who's your co-pilot at work, who you're interfacing about what to make dinner with and where your plan should be that weekend, and they are a model trained on you, like that will be one of your 5 people. And so again, if you can figure out how to tell that what you want to become and what you want to be formed into, as long as you want something that's worthwhile and moving you in the right direction towards the person you want to become, like in theory, that could be a really, really helpful thing.
Yeah. I agree. Ironically, I think one of the things that I have trouble getting over on this, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well, is not whether or not it's a benefit. It's this concept of it feels somehow wrong to the human soul inside of me to interact with something that's not conscious, or, it feels rightly or wrongly like I'm talking to a machine that has a pre-scripted response, even if I know that may or may not be like technically accurate. Where it suddenly gets easier for me to accept the idea of AI friends is, or confidants, or one of those 5 people that make up who you are, is if we cross some sort of arbitrary barrier towards general intelligence. Suddenly, I think there may be civil rights movement around AGI if and when that becomes something that we interact with. And then the big question becomes not if you should have friends that are artificial intelligences, it's how do we define AGI, and then when do we treat those people like people? Yeah. And that's another big scary conversation probably for another time as well.
And for you guys, you told me before you're 41, Kyle 39, and to improve from age 35 to 41, how much of that is fitness? How much of that is technical? How much of that is just gained racing experience? Like, what do you attribute the improved time to?
I think it's all of the above. I think definitely a lot of technical weight into some of the race preparation. I think maturity helped us out a lot too. In particular, when we were in T2, we slowed down a little bit to make sure that we were properly fueled on nutrition and all that.
Yeah, it's all of the above. The experience trumps fitness, although I would say I was probably stronger, not faster. I went in with more weight than I had in 18. In 18, I was emaciated by the time I got on the start line. This year, I was stronger and I carried more weight. And I think that just makes a difference pushing a human. The bike, we had 2 years to work on the bike. We'd made all these little micro changes to it. Moving from mechanical shifting to electronic shifting, it removed weight and made the bike easier to shift. We could talk about the bike for an hour. That made a huge difference though.
Yeah, Kyle mentioned maturity.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of a time in a past race where maybe you feel like the maturity wasn't at the level that it was for this race, and kind of how did that evolve over time?
One of the things that kept happening on the bike is we would get quiet. And Kyle talks a lot usually on the bike. Like he's coaching, he's encouraging, he's working through, he's checking in, how are you doing, And we would have these moments of kind of quietness because it got to a point where the only thing that was going to stop us was a bike mechanical. Like we were fine. Whereas in 18, there was kind of always this concern about the bike cutoff. Let me just say it real quick. In an Ironman, you have 10 and a half hours to do the swim and the bike. And for most people, that's fine. That's not a huge deal. For us, it is, 360, 370 pounds of rolling weight on the bike. Like the physics are not as easy as they are for somebody riding a 19 pound, 17 pound bike. But for us this year, we got to this place where it was just like something would have had to happen to our equipment. And, in 18, if that had happened, we would have stayed so stressed in that moment and we would have kind of stayed on top of each other. He would have pushed me even harder. And there was this maturity and understanding of what we were actually doing. Like, this is such an amazing experience. We're in the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii together as adults. You know, how many brothers like are running alongside each other at the New York City Marathon the whole way, every step. And that's what we were doing. And so it would get quiet and Kyle would just go, hey man, I'm just so grateful for you. And it was like this small shift of, instead of like this intensity of the moment, which was still there, it was this deep appreciation of the moment. It was like, it was so hard. We'll talk about it today. But at the same time, we appreciated every one of those little things we got to struggle through because we were doing it together. And I just think that maturity showed up like that throughout the day of, hey, I know it's hard, but you're doing fine. Look where you are. Take a moment and see what's going on.
How did you all get to that point? Was that a deliberate cultivation of that mindset? Was it through going through failures and failing that test and hitting the doldrums? Like, how do we get to that place of appreciation and gratitude for the moment, even as you're doing something so hard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think every race has a theme to it for us, whether it's yes, I can, or push beyond limits, or whatever the theme is. But for this particular race, it was all about gratitude. And what did that look like for us as individuals, and what did that look like for us together? And we just, on one of our practice rides, we get set it and it gets quit. From there, that it was all about gratitude. We were grateful to be on the island. We were grateful for our family, for my caregivers that were there, and we just amazing experience.
It's reps. It's just like doing, you know, when you talk to somebody that's in their, for us, I would say like our parents' age, like in their 70s, the life experiences have taught them so much. And the little things that we sweated about in 18 at the race, you know, I mean, I'll give you a great example. In 18, we hit the turnaround in Hawaii, which is around mile 60. And as we're starting our descent, I look out and I see the Pacific Ocean, and I'm just like totally taken by the moment. And I say to Kyle, I was like, hey, look at the ocean. Isn't this beautiful today? And he goes, hey, you got to focus, right? And he wasn't wrong. He was right, but we were both right. He needed just 1 second to reframe his mind to be really grateful for the last 52 miles, which were pretty hard then and were hard again in 24. But at the same time, he needed to draw my attention back to the task that we were trying to compete as athletes. And so the reps matter. We're not super intentional usually. And I think we learned that spending more time together leading into these races allows us to be more intentional. Like Kyle said, it was on a practice ride that we started talking about gratitude, and it just clicked. And I actually said that same thing to him. And I was like, so remember 18 when we said this to each other? He goes, yeah. I was like, we were both right, weren't we? And he goes, yeah. You know, so like it starts to make sense. Like, can you be intense and still appreciate the moment? Yeah, you can. And that's the maturity. And it just took us 6 years to keep learning those lessons. And how lucky are we that we got to put those lessons to good use on the race course?